Major Spoilers podcast covers news, reviews, and of course, spoilers, and goes into details about the topics discussed. So if you haven't read, listened, or watched the items we talk about, you might want to come back later.
I'm Matthew.
Rodrigo.
And I'm Steven, and you're listening to the Major Spoilers podcast, the podcast for pop culture and comic fans.
In this issue, sometimes stuff happens, nobody wants to deal with it, and who you gonna call? Major Spoilers, our intrepid podcast who sails into the eye of the storm, the heart of the matter, the mind of Minolta, and the liver and onions to bring you our perspective on the pop culture of the day. We got crime comics, we got mystery comics, we got science fiction comics, we even got a superhero too, so get ready to soak yourself in a soothing bath of nerdery, because the Major Spoilers podcast is on the air.
Welcome to issue 1088 of the Major Spoilers podcast. Thank you for downloading and checking us out this week. Hey, there was some news that came out today that Netflix has finally greenlit a new Ghostbusters animated series. Now, this will be a 3D series. We don't know anything about plot, but we do know that the executive producer will be Elliot Kalan, who, along with Jason Reitman, did the most recent Ghostbusters movies. Reitman did Ghostbusters Afterlife, and Kalan did Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. He was the director on that. Netflix and Ghost Corps Inc. are going to produce it, as well as Sony's Columbia Pictures. And from what we understand, even though the plot details are completely wrapped up, that it will probably follow along the lines of the most recent two movies.
But can they get the original actors? Because I heard that Coulier asks a lot of money these days.
I don't think...
Rodrigo, what do you think of Ghostbusters, the animated series? Are you ready for another one of those? This is only, the third? Well, technically fourth if you don't want to talk about the real the other Ghostbusters stuff. What do you think about another Ghostbusters?
Oh, that's what I was hoping it was. I was hoping to see the monkey.
Yeah.
So, no, it'll be interesting. I think that for me, my experience of the Ghostbusters, because I was, too young to go to the theater when they first came out, was very piecemeal. Like, probably the first thing I ever saw of the Ghostbusters was the real Ghostbusters TV show. And then I saw the one with the monkey. And then I saw the Extreme Ghostbusters, and somewhere in there I watched the movies. So the idea of the Ghostbusters as a company that has completely different characters doesn't bother me very much. So yeah, if they want to make something with the Afterlife characters or with new characters, I'm on board enough to definitely to watch the first couple episodes.
Yeah, me too, I think. I enjoyed Ghostbusters for what it is. I enjoyed the animated shows for what they are. And so we talked a lot in the pre-show this week about nostalgia versus new IP. And we have a little discussion around that in regards to the D23 announcements. And this kind of falls in that same vein. I don't think that, if it's following the Afterlife and Frozen Empire movies, then it's definitely targeting a younger audience. But there's also the huge nostalgia factor for people who are huge Ghostbusters fans, especially when you say Ghostbusters, the animated series, because I've had a lot of friends in my life that just Ghostbusters, that animated show, was the stuff. That was the best thing that they grew up with. And so I think that there's some nostalgia factor playing on this as well. I guess I'm more curious why, and of course it's Netflix is the answer, ladies and gentlemen, just like Zaslav is the answer for all the woes that befall Warner Brothers. Netflix is its own enemy, but why it's taken them 2 years to finally green light this project, I have a feeling it is it relevant, and can we get people excited about it? But yeah, good luck to them. Matthew, you have any thoughts?
I have never been a fan of cartoon adaptations of the Ghostbusters, and I don't know why. For me, I like the movie, but half the fun of the movie is the actors involved. So while it's, hilarious to watch the real Ghostbusters and, hear the stories of how they actually told Ernie Hudson, who played Winston, that he didn't sound enough like Winston to play Winston in the cartoon, I feel like it's it's a separate thing. it's almost its own thing. You know, when IDW did the universe smashing stuff, they're like, okay, separate universe, same names, and I'm sort of fine with that. I I have like a deep love of Ghostbusters, like anyone who was 13 in 1984 does, but not as a franchise, I guess. I mean, I like the sequel, but unless this is one of those, oh my God, this is amazing, you guys, you have to totally watch this things, I probably won't even notice, which is kind of sad.
Well, and that's certainly something I don't think Netflix wants to hear.
Well, I mean, Netflix doesn't care what I think. They
Yeah, but
canceled How I Met Your Father after 2 seasons and
if
didn't
they
even tell me who the father was.
yeah, so if the thing is that builds up to your one voice of a million, that could be bad news, because if there's a million people that are also like, if I see it, fine, I'm not gonna rush right out and watch this, then that's probably one of the reasons why Netflix is like, oh, do we do this? Is it relevant?
Right.
How well did these movies do? And certainly there was a lot of flack in recent years about all three of the most recent Ghostbusters movies. And I think that that's probably why they were weighing their decision. If Netflix
Three?
really wanted, you had the All Girl.
I forgot about
Netflix.
Frozen Empire. Yeah,
Frozen Empire was the most recent, and then Afterlife was kind of like the continuation of the original Ghostbusters movies. If Netflix really, really, really wanted to get the olds to come back and introduce their kids to Ghostbusters in animated form, then they really would do better off to do a whole new season of the real Ghostbusters animated series from back in the day, because that one isn't really necessarily tied to the movies, but it also has that strong nostalgia factor, and certainly with X-Men 97 being a huge hit, that could bring a lot of people in as well. So there you go. What do you think, dear listeners? What do you think of a new Ghostbusters animated show? We want to know what your thoughts are. Head over to our Discord server, jump into the Major Spoilers podcast channel, or you can jump into the television channel and talk about this, or really anything related to comics and pop culture and all this stuff. There's even a sports channel, which was rather active during the Olympics. It's all for free when you join our Major Spoilers Discord. There is a link in the show notes for you to check it out. All right, let us do some reviews. Matthew, what is going on with the sensational She-Hulk?
Well, it's ending, which is kind of disappointing for me. But issue 10, Sensational She-Hulk number 10, written by Rainbow Rowell, art by André Genolet, is the last issue of the most recent series. And I think, exclamation point and or, the other thing, the little starry thing. I think that I reviewed a previous issue of this on the podcast and remarked that they brought in the fourth wall breaking in a way that I found fascinating and crazy. Most of this whole series has featured She-Hulk in a relationship with Jack of Hearts, the former Avenger, who absorbs radiation. That's his power. And so whenever they want to be together, he has to go and absorb as much radiation as possible so that his powers don't take all of her gamma radiation from her and turn her into no more of a She-Hulk. This issue is interesting because this is what happens when you suddenly get canceled in the middle of a bunch of ongoing plot threads. So we do see She-Hulk, her law career had been on hold. She had been working with one of her former colleagues, but now she may have a new job opening. And of course, her relationship with Jack is reaching a moment where they have to decide, is this real or is it something else? And we do have a moment where the Avengers offer her membership, and she, takes another test run as an active Avenger. But of course, if you read the Avengers books, you do kind of have to ask yourself, don't we know how this ends? But you don't know how this ends. And I think that's the best part of it. The part of it that feels like less than the best is the fact that it is just a 20-page comic. And you do have a lot of threads that Rainbow and company are going to be wrapping up. We have an ongoing subplot with Ransack the Reject and Carcass, who are two members of the Eternals and or the Deviants, floating around and subletting an apartment from She-Hulk. And we have to deal with the Jack of Hearts situation and how, if she's going to be an Avenger, her now back from the dead boyfriend exploded and killed several of them. And they're all back from the dead too, but it's still very, very awkward. And you have to ask yourself, every time a title ends in the Marvel Universe, you do have kind of a responsibility. And they have said as much. They've used the phrase, we're putting the toys back in the box for the next creator. But I've always found that a little bit depressing. I feel like, when you do have those moments, sometimes it's hard to take that, that expectation that we're doing all of this and we're going to put it where it goes and we're going to set the status quo back to whatever the next arc needs it to be. And that can be tough. I feel like, without revealing too much, because if you have been reading She-Hulk High, it's you and me, apparently. And that there are a few things that have been sort of floating around in this volume that are really new and really fresh and really hard to kind of put into a status quo She-Hulk story. So I fear that some of the stuff that I like the most about this era is going to go away with the metaphorical putting it back in the box. That said, this is a beautiful issue. This is really, really well drawn. Absolutely gorgeous stuff. And last issue, Genele just sort of debuted a new She-Hulk costume. There it is. And it's great. It's amazing. It has like pants and a shirt, and it has a jacket and boots. So she's not running around in, a ripped dress or just a singlet. And it's kind of wonderful. But all in all, when I get to the end of the issue, that sense of the time well spent is kind of balanced with a sense of, man, I really wish this had been a bigger hit. I wish there had been more of it. And I kind of wish they had given them a little more time to wrap this all up, because I feel like the creative team does really good work within the confines that they are given. But the confines are the problem and not the creators. So I'm going to go with 3.5 slices of meatloaf for Sensational She-Hulk number 10. If you have not been reading it, there's a good side to this. You may be able to get all 10 issues in one collected trade paperback, read it all, and go, man, that was a lot of fun. I wonder what happened to Jack Hearts. 5 years down the line, no one will know.
Knowing Marvel, though, they'll split it into 2 volumes of 5.
Well, of course. I mean, maximize the profits, my friends.
Yeah. Out this week, ladies and gentlemen, from Image Comics is the latest Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips book called Houses of the Unholy. Now, this one is interesting because it dives into the concept of the Satanic Panic. For those of you that don't know, well, maybe you do. I think everybody's familiar with the Satanic Panic. Certainly in the 60s and the early 70s, it was building to a boil. There were certainly a lot of events that happened that were totally made up. The Satanic Panic was just a moral outrage brought on by just change that's going on, radical change that's going on in the world. And of course, all this radical change could only be the work of Satan. And, there were tales of, there's a great one where this woman who ran a daycare was sentenced to jail because all these kids said that the woman was performing satanic rituals and Satan was coming and having sex with the kids, and the kids were all on the stands. And this was a horrible, horrible thing. I want to say this is like 84, 85, somewhere around there when that happened. And it turned out in real life that was all made up. And this poor woman had her reputation and went to jail over stuff that was legitimately not real. And so Houses of the Unholy kind of picks up on that story where we are introduced to a woman who is older now. She went through the Satanic Panic in the 90s. And that's something a lot of people don't realize is a lot of people think that the Satanic Panic ended in the 80s. It actually went through the early 2000s before it kind of petered out. And now it's kind of coming back for a variety of different reasons. But this is the story about a woman who was one of those children, not the actual children from the real life event, but something similar where she and a bunch of other kids growing up were told that, their daycare they were involved in satanic rituals and that they'd been touched and, kids were getting killed by the devil and monsters and all this stuff. And it turned out to be wrong. So she is very jaded. She's gone through PTSD over this. Her family has had a lot of issues going through this. And she is now a private investigator who goes out and rescue kids who are in a cult and tries to deprogram them to get them back to her family. But she's always running from the fact that she was part of a cult growing up. And then she runs into an FBI agent that is like, hey, I'm glad I found you because all the 6 other kids that were part of this trial with you, they're all dying one by one. And we need to figure out why these people are dying. And so they go on a cross-country trip to track down these kids. And they find out that there is maybe a satanic cult that is back that is trying to complete rituals. And then it gets really, really weird. And if Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips are alluding to what I think they are alluding to, at the end of the book suddenly becomes terrifying because now the question is not that this girl grew up having to tell everyone, no, all this stuff that happened to me when I was a kid was all made up. What if it wasn't all made up? What if it was real and what she's repressing are the actual events as opposed to trying to tell everybody none of that stuff happened? And literally the way that there's a sequence of events that happen at the end of this book that when I first read it, I was like, oh, this stuff really happened. And wow, it gets creepy and weird in the last. A lot of the Brubaker and Phillips books tend to have a downer note to them, but this one really had an end of the world vibe to it. And that one was a super downer. Ed Brubaker, of course, is a fantastic writer. Sean Phillips is a fantastic artist. Jacob Phillips, who we've read recently because he's the artist in that Texas Blood series, is the colorist again. And, I'm biased. I like all 3 of these creators together. I can't give this anything less than 5 out of 5 because it is that well written. And depending on if you have the same view of the ending of this book as I do, you went from believing, oh, yeah, the Satanic Panic is totally unreal and make-believe to, oh, no, all that stuff really happened and is true. That makes it terrifying. And I love that adventure of trying to do a mystery where it turns out that the people you thought were lying were really telling the truth. So Houses of the Unholy out this week from Image Comics. If you pick it up, I want to see if you get the same end of the world vibe that I do at the end of the book, or if you're just like, nah, this person is just dead and it's just hopeless for her, not for everyone else. Check it out. It's $24.99 because it is a hardcover and it is a single volume. So I like that there are creators that are putting everything out there that's just saying, we're not going to make this a 6-issue series. We're not going to try to make this, a year-long thing. We're going to make it in one book. And this is our book for this quarter. And there you go. And I hope they do well with it. So there you go. If you want to pick up Sensational She-Hulk number 10 or Houses of the Unholy, there are links to the Amazon editions of these books that you can buy either in physical or digital form. If you do use the Amazon links in the show notes and you do make those purchases, or really any purchase through those links, a little bit of money comes back to us and that helps us out and allows us to continue this show going forward. But unfortunately, Titan Comics does not have an Amazon presence. And I'm very excited about next week's Huge Detective number 1, because this has got a trippy premise and I'm all in on it.
Huge Detective.
Dun, dun, dun.
Woody Harrelson is enormous. No. So Huge Detective takes place in a world much like our own, except at some point, enormous giants burst out of the ground, had a bit of a war with humanity, and they were like, okay, all right. How about all the giants move to Australia and we remove all humans from Australia so they don't have to deal with them. And Huge Detective takes place 40 years after that. Since then, there's been a lot more cooperation between the huge, which are the giants, and humans. Giants have also sort of joined the human economy in the sense that they will transport humans. Like they basically have like hotel backpacks, and like humans get into them. And so if you want to like cross the ocean or whatever, the giants will take you, which is nice. This is a story about a non-giant person who killed somebody, and there's a human person who killed somebody. There's a detective investigating it, but the murderer thinks of himself as a giant. He thinks he's a huge, and so in order to get any information out of him, the police have to kind of treat him like one. So they put him in like a special cell that's like very far away so that everybody looks very small and stuff. It's so I'm just kind of rolling with it here, but like this book's initial sort of premise for the world is like very weird. And for example, one of the things that there is a huge detective. So most of the time, giants don't cross into human territory. They all live in Australia. They'll basically ferry people across the sea or whatever, but they don't walk onto the human shore. For some reason, this giant detective has been allowed to do it. He's not just looking at this guy, like helping with the human investigation with this guy who thinks it's a huge. He's also looking for two giants that have disappeared, which is weird because they're gigantic. Where would you hide them, right? Also, something's happening in the moon. It's very weird. I enjoyed it, though. It's very well written. The characters have a lot of, I don't know, like zest to them. I can see these relationships and rivalries and problems and interesting potential already beginning to form. I want to say this is based on a book, but I don't remember. But yes, I would strongly recommend it. The art by Magenta King is very cool. I really like it. The giants are very cool looking. They're mostly humanoid, but not exactly. They don't have the exact same proportions as humans. They might have like bumps or horns or other things. So they're very distinctive. Yeah, I would say check it out. I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5 slices of meatloaf because yeah. I'm like, okay, yeah, I want to know what happens with this giant detective.
It looks crazy and weird.
Yeah.
They sent us solicitations for this a couple of weeks ago. I think we have preview up on the website now that people can check out. But yeah, I'm down for this weirdness that's in this book. So there you go. All right. Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you, Matthew. Dear listener, I want to give a special thank you to Rusty Stowe, who signed up for another year of being a Major Spoilers patron. I also want to give a big shout out to Michael Copeland, who became a new $2 a month member. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's through the support of our podcast patrons like Michael and Rusty that we are able to bring you a show like this week after week. Rusty knows he gets a discount when he signs up for a full year in advance, and Michael knows that every little bit helps, even at $2 a month. And as we leave the summer behind, now's the time for you to get on board, just like Michael, and become a patron, a podcast patron at patreon.com/Major Spoilers. Now listen, you don't have to sign up for a full year in advance. You might even have a few more bucks that you can contribute, and you can become a silver level member for a mere $5 a month, and you get access to 4 bonus episodes a month that you're not going to find anywhere else. You can even go up to the gold level and get access to the VIP live chat, where I tell you what's going on behind the scenes at Major Spoilers. How many other companies pull the curtain back like that? Certainly, if you're Warner Brothers, you get up there and you blame everyone else for your woes, but not yourself. Mm-hmm. If you're a certain company that's all on the social media, you try to sue everybody. I should go out. We should do like that guy. We should go out and sue everybody who's listening to this show for not supporting us. We would never do that because we're not assholes, right?
Also, it takes money to sue.
Yeah, not in this sense. We're not.
Oh, no, it doesn't take any money to sue because we're going to win. And then we have all the money in the world. Bah, ha, ha, ha. I don't know what this person is thinking.
Is that what they think?
I'm guessing that's what this person thinks. We would never do that because we know that our patrons support us by giving a small contribution each month. We're going to call it a tip going forward because depending on how this election goes out, the definition of tip could be very, very, very important. So how about you tip us for this show and get access to some other stuff by going to patreon.com/major spoilers. All right, everybody. It is, I didn't realize this. No, I did realize this when we picked this comic. This week, we celebrate the birth date, and between now and the next podcast, and the death date of one Hugo Gernsback. And you might be saying, well, who's Hugo Gernsback? Well, if you don't know who Hugo Gernsback is, then what are you even a science fiction fan?
Yeah.
Because without Gernsback, we wouldn't have what we consider today's modern science fiction because he started up a bunch of magazines, one of them a little something called Amazing Stories that introduced the world to what we would consider science fiction of today, all the way back in 1928. It was a great outlet for people to grow, and we got to see so many different authors get published for the first time that then went on and did their own amazing things. He was also in charge of Science Fiction Plus and a bunch of other science magazines. But then I was like, if Hugo Gernsback is such a big deal when it comes to science fiction, did Hugo Gernsback ever do a comic book? And sure enough, he did. And that brings us to this week's Golden Age comic, Super World Comics #2, that features an entry by Gernsback, which isn't even a comic book. It's like an essay about how great he is and how you can learn while you sleep through his hypnobiosphere and all these other things. So this is, among other things, kind of our tie-in to Hugo Gernsback's birthday. You can go around this week, for those of you that want to know, August 16th is his birthday. And you can go around and say, oh, did you know on this date Hugo Gernsback was born? And then just 3 days later on August 19th, you can go around and say, hey, did you know this is the date that Hugo Gernsback died? But this is also a great example of just the type of Golden Age comics that were going on as everyone was trying to figure out, hey, what do we do with this medium of comics? Some of it might be stuff that have appeared in papers. In fact, this Super World Comics has a number of Little Nemo and Dreamland strips, as well as Dream of the Mince Pie Fiend, which I think is a takeoff of that. And then it's got some original stuff, some Flash Gordon ripoff stuff that's going on in here, kid adventures, but it's all couched in this idea that everything that we're reading in this comic is scientifically possible if only people would pull their heads out of their butts and do real science the way Gernsback wants people to do science. I mean, let's just find out. Matthew, question.
Yes,
if you were a space flyer midway between the Earth and Mars, what would happen to you and your weight?
Well, my weight, I'm unusual. My weight would be exactly the same.
Wrong. For your answer, see page 3. Rodrigo, what happens to liquids in outer space when they have no weight?
They turn into balls.
Correct. Matthew, what is the best way to sleep comfortably when you have lost your weight and weigh practically nothing?
Would it be on a bed of air?
Correct. Rodrigo, is it possible to learn while you sleep?
Why, yes, it is. You just have to plug yourself into the psychoflobinator.
It's called
I forget what it was called.
If you were in a strange place, Matthew, and had to make a strong emergency lock that would keep anyone out, how would you do it?
I don't know. How would I?
I don't know. Check out page 31. Let's see. How would you cut? Oh, this is the weirdest one. How would you cut a piece of glass, Rodrigo, with an ordinary pair of scissors?
Ooh, I know. Go ahead.
Oh, Matthew knows.
I do know. You got it underwater.
Correct. See page 50, Rodrigo, for a remedial course.
Yeah.
Matthew, has Mars vegetation the same as our own Earth?
Yes.
Well, incorrect, but also yes, as of this printing.
Yeah, no,
And
a lot
whatever
of
year
these
this
are
came out.
incorrect. Yeah, pretty much none of these are actually correct.
Yeah, but that's the premise, right? So as you open up this book, there is a whole thing from the editor that's like, hey, parents, we know that these comic books are scary and that you're going to one day try to burn comic books just like the Nazis will. And if you're reading this and wondering what a Nazi is, just wait a few years and it'll all become clear to you. But inside the pages of this book, we want this to be an instructional book for your dumb child because everything in these comics has real science. And to prove it, we've got a questionnaire in the back of the magazine that will test your children's knowledge of everything they're reading. Sincerely, the publishers. This is crazy. I will say that a lot of this stuff was exactly what I think of when I think of Golden Age comics.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it is, what the F are you guys thinking?
Oh man,
This is almost pre-Golden Age. This really does feel to me like I know that Overstreet calls it the Platinum Age, but the age before, 1930.
Well, this is 1940 is when this came out. So
yeah, but this feels okay.
It
Well,
feels
here's the thing about
earlier.
1940. 1940, comic books were everywhere, and having a comic book in 1940 in a lot of ways was like being able to print money. And the fact that Super World Comics went 3 issues and then went down due to lack of sales may tell you something about Super World Comics. But this book is didactic. This book just it bugs me, and I don't know why. I've always loved
you don't know why it bugs
crazy,
you?
stupid comics. Yeah,
I mean,
I don't know
there's
why.
literally the very first comic
yeah,
is about a blonde-haired adventurer guy who's going to fly
Yeah.
to Mars to stop Mars from happening, and he's going to take along his dark-haired girlfriend and her scientist father, and they fly off in a rocket ship. It's Flash Gordon. This is all Flash Gordon
it is
stuff.
Flash Gordon.
And then we get
there's some
a
stuff that-
we get this crime buster story about 2 kids who can turn themselves invisible, which is kind of silly. We got
Buzz
Hypnox.
Allen.
The Hypnox, the super hypnotist, which is like, who's that crazy guy that did the comics that like make no
Fletcher
sense?
Hanks.
Yeah, Fletcher Hanks. This is like a Fletcher Hanks comic.
The thing about Hypnox that's so amazing is that Hypnox is like this weird diamond on top of the pile of super comics. But then you look at his costume, and
it's
it
the
has
dumbest
that
thing.
incredibly stupid helmet and the Yannick belt buckle,
man.
and just it is so disturbing to look at.
The best part about the Hypnox comic is that Hypnox doesn't appear until like the 3rd page of it.
Yeah.
So they're talking about it, and it's all like gangster looking guys, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna get Hypnox." I've never heard of Hypnox before, and this was like, so I was like, "Oh, I'm expecting somebody who looks like Doc Savage or Dick Tracy or The Shadow, somebody who's gonna be in like plain clothes, but is like a super cool super guy." And then I get to it, and he is fabulous. Like
he's dressed
it's
like
a red
microphone.
leotard. It's a red leotard. He's got an eye across his chest with a weird green jewel for a belt buckle that goes vertical. And then he's got like a giant hairnet. Like he's wearing a giant colander on his head.
yeah, or like an armadillo shell. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know what.
something.
I think it's supposed to be like a helmet.
Well, yeah, of course.
No,
it's
it is.
supposed to
It
be a
is supposed
helmet.
to be a helmet. Yeah.
But like a military helmet. You know how you would see the military helmets
Oh.
with
I don't think it's that. This is definitely like a
Sometimes, yeah, it's supposed to be some sort of like space age nonsense.
yeah.
It
But
looks like
here's the
he's got a
thing.
microphone scrim on his head, is what it looks like.
So we see Hypnox appear, and he's not, from what we can tell, like he's not rushing out of his house. He's just like meandering out of his house.
Yeah.
He's gonna go do something. Like he's not dressed up. He's not like, oh no, some
This is his everyday
superheroing
wear.
needs to happen. This is just how he dresses.
Yeah. No, like every day. Seriously,
Every
it's
day.
like the
Yeah, he
weirdest
just comes
thing.
up, he's just on his way to this store, and the bad guys come over and they knock him on his helmet head and they knock him out. What's the point of the helmet?
Well, so hey, if people are complaining about the new Star Wars video game, right, where Star Wars Outlaws, where they're in the demo, the girl is going up and punching a stormtrooper in the back of the head, and he's wearing a helmet, of course, and everyone's like, do people not understand how helmets work? Well, apparently, even as far back as 1940, people didn't understand how helmets work because they take him down the same way this girl in the Star Wars Outlaws video game takes down a stormtrooper. Unfortunately, Hypnox has the power of hypnotism, unlike a stormtrooper. And Hypnox is able to take the bad guy and hypnotize him and goose step out the door and then skip like a May Queen and then stand like a public statue and make a public embarrassment out of the McFadden. And
like, at no point do the cops get involved. Like,
no, not at all.
He doesn't. He's like, oh, okay, so he's gonna walk him to jail because he was doing something illegal. It's like, this is a personal feud between two people.
Yeah,
like they are not involving the cops. One of them is like an old timey gangster, and one of them is a super hypnotist in pajamas, and that's just what this comic is.
Yeah,
and then we have stuff that was like, I think even I could have been a comic book artist in the 1940s because Smarty Artie, he knows it all, and it's horrible art.
Yeah,
it is.
Really
it is like eighth grader type styles. And then, of course, Hugo Gernsback pops in and gives a whole 2-page lecture on how 20 years ago he invented the hypnobiosphere that allows you to take school lessons while you sleep.
Yeah, that I think is the thing that. All right, so here's.
It's still here today, right?
It is, and people do try to sleep learn, but one of the things, and this may be because I come from the comic book side of things. One of the things that I always heard about Gernsback was that he was a huge crook, and that he was this self-aggrandizing jerk who would tell you how great he was and then steal your money, especially if you were writing for his comics books. But it was one of those. I read this, and I don't usually get personally invested in like a 57,000-year-old thing, but I'm just like, I was so mad at Hugo Gernsback throughout that whole piece. I'm just like, you shut your lying.
Well, he certainly, I think part of the problem why it comes off that way is because he certainly comes off as super ego, where he's just like, oh, I'm smarter than the rest of you. And I've been telling you people this for years.
The ignorant fools, and the ignorant fool. You ignorant fools will never understand my brilliance. And I get it. We've all been there. I said that to my child not 2 weeks ago. But you just, oh dear. And this is the thing. Stephen did point out this is Gernsback's only comic book thing that he did. Superworld did 3 issues in 1940. And again, 1940, comic books were selling like hotcakes. Comic books were selling like, condoms in a barbecue, whatever. I don't know. It's a bad metaphor, but comic books were selling very, very well in 1940. And this one's just like, it's almost no fun.
Even the comic books, just Detective Crane and the case of the Sleeping Death, not interesting. Also the hands in that sequence. Also the villain is really like creepy looking. But the hands in this story are just like the weirdest AI generated hands that you've ever seen.
The interesting thing, and I actually did some digging and I tried to find who the artists were in this book. And, the Grand Comic Book Database doesn't have a whole lot of information except for the stuff that's clearly Winsor McCay and the stuff that's signed by Ray Burley. I can't find any indication of who drew these things. Most of them were written by Hornig, Charles Hornig, who was Gernsback's, basically, he was Gernsback's Jim Shooter. He was like this really, really young guy who came and worked for him, who was like 16 or 17, and he was like this wunderkind. So like almost all of this, the stories in this book are written by Hornig, with the exception of, the stuff that came from other places. You know, the Winsor McKay stuff is reprints, and then the Alibi Alice thing is written by Ruth Leslie. But I'm just it's weird to me that at this point in time, and with so many people hyper fixated on the golden age of comics and being like, oh, this is crazy. We got to know everything we can about Fletcher Hanks, and we got to know everything we can about Stan Lee and the people who worked for Stan Lee in 1934. There's like nothing. This comic book just sort of rolled off the end of the pier.
Well, it feels, I mean, I know that they're trying to make this a science book and try to make it for, you know, good for kids type stuff. But this feels like a comic book that you get with your packet of seeds, or that you read in a doctor's office, or you get with a box of cereal kind of stuff. That's the quality of this stuff. Yeah.
It's the perfect thing. Yeah, like when you go in, but my kid, when they first diagnosed her with type 1 diabetes, they gave her a comic book with the D Team. And there's these weirdo superheroes who literally all they do is teach her about her carbs and sugar and all of these things. And that is actually a perfect analogy. That is exactly what this is. This is like
it's just
when the Avengers
like
teamed up with the Craftsman tools.
Yeah, it's like a highlights issue. That's really what it is. In fact, the same artist of Smarty Artie does Alibi Alice in She Fibs by Ruth Leslie. Just horrible art.
Yeah. The worst part about that one is that because of the pacing of the comic, you really feel like they're setting up that actually she was telling the truth, but then she just lies like they told you at the beginning. So you're like, oh, well, then this is boring and nothing actually happened.
Yeah, exactly. And then I'm super curious as to how they were able to get the Little Nemo strips in here.
Illegally.
Well, I wouldn't say illegally, but it's just really weird that you get like 4 to 5 Little Nemo and Mince Pie Fiend comics in here, and it's like these are clearly, you know, early 1900 Sunday strips that they've somehow licensed to get into the comic.
Crushingly racist.
Oh my God, so racist. And the Nemo strips are from between 1906 and 1910. So they are like 30-year-old books.
Yeah.
I honestly wonder if they even had the rights.
I mean, they may not have.
I'm just like,
who knows? They probably people could care less. You know, where these came from. So this is an interesting book. Should you try to go out and find it? Probably not. There's really nothing interesting in this. I just thought it would be fun for us to take a look at something comic related that Hugo Gernsback had his thumb on in some way, shape, or form. But this is really skippable. There is nothing in here that is lasting. I don't think I don't know if Hypnox has appeared anywhere else.
No, but
maybe a Grant Morrison or a what's the one that's been tied up for years that Marvel finally got their hands on, and then they've really done nothing. Miracle Man. Hypnox feels like a Miracle Man kind of
in the making.
Yeah,
I would not trust anyone other than Grant Morrison, or maybe if he was like being on his very, very absolute best behavior, maybe Garth Ennis to do anything with Hugo. Nah, Alan Moore's done with comics. He's like, he's off, you know, doing wizard stuff and growing out his beard. It's fine. It's his deal.
So what do you think of this whole Super World Comics, Matthew?
Well, here's the deal. As the self-appointed comic book historian of major spoilers, there are books that I will tell you, this book is weird in a completely unique way, and it's worth experiencing. Super World Comics is half of that. It is weird in a very unique way. Otter Disaster and I have actually had discussions about Hypnox, and I want to say Calamity John as well as a fan of the Hypnox feature. But I routinely subject myself to Golden Age comics for fun, and I was born in 1970, so I am definitely not the target audience for that. But I will tell you this, as someone who has in fact read all of these goofy comics that I, review for Major Spoilers and talk about on the interwebs, I would not recommend this to anybody, because as like a talking piece, as something that you've read just to go, hey, you guys, other friends, other comic nerds, I read this Super World comics. First of all, you're not going to find anybody who wants to talk about Super World comics, and I actually found myself a little bored. Your point. I didn't catch it being necessarily a Flash Gordon knockoff, but everything in here feels very derivative of something else. Even like Hypnox is wacky, but Hypnox is kind of a wacky take on Mandrake the Mystic.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know. I just, if you really want to know why we're all so discomfited, just go and read the Little Nemo and Dreamland strips with its just horrifying racial depictions,
Rodrigo?
And then just go, oh, right.
Rodrigo, what do you think of this whole thing?
So I think it's worthwhile to look at comics like this and say, what were these comics trying to do? Were they successful? This is the dawn of superhero comics, or like maybe the
couple of years
hours
after.
right before the dawn.
This is really the dawn of comics.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see what was happening before, right? And we see this leading directly into it, right? Hypnox is dressed like a superhero. And the some characters that are in this book have superpowers. It just hasn't coalesced into a more structured thing. So in that sense, comics like this are worth checking out. I'm not saying you should check out this comic because, as has been pointed out, it's pretty boring. Nothing really that interesting happens. There are no twists and turns in the stories, and sure, some of the stories are 3 pages, but you can throw something in there. Most of the stuff that's funny tends to be unintentional. And that's not great. So I would say I would pass on this, but if you want to track down comics from this era, I'm sure there's plenty to look at.
There's plenty of better comics out there from the 1940s than this, ladies and gentlemen.
Just go dig through the Centaur Comics library if you want comics from 1940 that are crazy in a good way.
All right, everybody. That wraps it up for this issue. Thank you so much for listening. If you found value in the show, we'd love for you to join us on our Patreon, where you will find even more fun, including the Major Spoilers Podcast pre-show, where we talk... What did we talk about? We talked about D23. We talked about the Multiverse of Madness. We also talked about casting Doc Savage in a movie. It's all exclusive over on our Patreon page, patreon.com/Major Spoilers. Next week on the show, we're placing a call. That's right. A call to Cthulhu. Why? Because we know that you love comics and we do too, and we will talk with you soon.
Fat the X-ray vision of a Superman. I could save a few bucks and stand around and read through the covers of the comics on the stand. But although every other page would be backwards, I suppose I could still read the evens and the odds. Well, I don't know. Guess I haven't thought this all the way through. Plus, as soon as the comic book store guy knew, they kicked my butt out on the corner. What a major spoiler. What a major spoiler. Think about a better way. If I was hulking green or gray, I could just bust through that brick wall, take their comic books away. But then the little meat would deal with all the tanks and bombs and guns. Have you ever tried to read a series with all that going on? Guess I need to rethink this plan. How would I bag and board my comics with such huge hands? Guess I already told ya. What a major spoiler. What a major spoiler. Yeah, yeah, yeah. What a major spoiler. What a major spoiler. If I'm Stark Raven, rich like a man of iron, I might not be surprised to find that I might actually have the hard cold to follow an entire storyline. But would I really even need to read up on all those escapades? I mean, who needs such distractions when your sister's such a babe? But the downside is such a beast. Being shot up in a funny in the Middle East with a gang sign throwing soldier. What a major major spoiler. What a major spoiler. Yeah, yeah, yeah. What a major spoiler. Whoa, 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 whoa. What a major spoiler.
This podcast is copyright 2024 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.